Hey, hello everyone, and welcome again to tonight's online information session for the South Main portion of the Lake to Lake route. I think we're ready to get started. Tonight's meeting is taking place on the traditional territories of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. We extend our appreciation to the Syilx Okanagan people for the opportunity to hold this meeting here today. My name is Andrea Rendell, Communications and Engagement Specialist with the City. Joining me tonight are Joanne Klebb, Communications and Engagement Manager with the City of Penticton, Jonathan Chu, City Engineer, and Kristen Dixon, General Manager of Infrastructure for the City of Penticton. The City is proceeding with the final section of the Lake to Lake All Ages and Abilities bike route. Tonight's session is intended to inform interested residents about the changes that are proposed for South Main, answer your questions, and gather your feedback. The feedback will be considered as we finalize the design, and it will be shared with Council. Tonight, you'll receive a presentation that will go over the background of the Lake to Lake project, review the sections of the South Main portion of the Lake to Lake route, followed by an opportunity to ask staff questions at the end. So how does it work? Again, just a reminder that I will be recording this session. This is so we can accurately capture the feedback we receive in the discussion portion, and the recording will be available on shapeyourcitypenticton.ca. So we're going to have a brief presentation and then open the floor to hear your questions at the end. And it looks like we've got a small group this evening. So for questions at the end, we'll just get you to raise your hand, or you can pop your question in the chat or Q&A function. And if you choose to raise your hand, we'll call on your name and unmute you, and you can just ask your question to the group. But I will remind you that we do want to keep questions on topic and stay respectful, and just to know that we will be moderating the chat and Q&A. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me. Sorry, so I'm just going to get started with a little bit of background and how we kind of started this whole Lake to Lake bike route project. And it was kind of stems from a few different plans that we have at the city, one of which is the Community Climate Action Plan. So in that action plan there, it was identified that 55% of our entire community's emissions come from motor vehicles. So one of the targets identified in the plan was to shift beyond the car. And what that means is to encourage active and accessible transportation and transit as an alternative to using motor vehicles. Aside from meeting our community climate action plans, it also means we can accommodate future growth in our city without requiring the need to build bigger roads. One of the other plans that also informed this decision was our Transportation Master Plan. So approved in 2021, the Transportation Master Plan provides long-term direction on how we use our roads, parking, and trails with focus on active mobility for all ages and abilities. The plan focused on 6 key priorities as seen on the hierarchy figure on the right. Mobility alternatives such as walking, biking, and transit were given priority. However, accommodating the movement of goods, encouraging multi-occupancy vehicle use, and managing single occupancy vehicles were still carefully considered and planned for. Contained within the master plan are figures that show the current and future priority areas for each sidewalk, cycling, and intersection upgrades. Specific projects are also listed that each support the 6 key priorities. So a little bit more background on the Lake to Lake. So the route was first conceived in 2012 as part of the Cycling Network Plan. Reconfirmed in 2019 with the official community plan, the project was initiated in 2020. That was followed up by a citywide engagement to identify the appropriate route and a council decision to proceed in 2021. As you already know, Martin Street and Fairview were built in 2021, followed by Duncan and Atkinson Street built in 2022. Kinney Avenue and South Main to Galt are currently being built now, and you'll see that continue on to the 2024 construction season. South Main to the Ska Marina is to start in late 2023, pending contractor availability. So based on our design basis, what we hear a lot is, what is a AAA facility? And what that stands for is all ages and abilities. So it's a bike route that's been designed to meet the needs of more cyclists than a standard bike lane. It feels safe and comfortable for all users, including children, seniors, people with disabilities, and new riders. So as you can see, we are specifically targeting those vulnerable users who would otherwise not feel safe or comfortable riding in a non-protected bike lane. And for those curious, I've listed a few of the design resources that we reference when we complete our designs. So what to watch for? In the next section, we're going to be going through some of the detailed design of the project. The key features of this design are unidirectional bike lanes on both sides of the street, proposed floating on-street parking, proposed landscaping with trees within the boulevards, and floating bus stops. So diving right into it, the first section of the design, this design proposes to create parking pockets on the east side of the street and to replace non-permitted and low-use parking areas with landscaped boulevards and street trees. There will be approximately 7 on-street parking stalls proposed. The parking and trees are proposed on the east side of the street, as there are less conflicts with underground and overhead utilities. The design also introduces a new crosswalk at Dolphin Place, a reduced 30km/h speed, and proposes the addition of designated left turn lanes at Green Avenue to alleviate congestion. The left turn lanes will result in the removal of some of the on-street parking around the intersection. Moving on to section 2, parking continues on the east side to allow for the left turn bays at Green Avenue, and there's a new crosswalk to connect to the schools. Parking then switches to the west side following the floating bus stop. The design shows the relocation of the existing crosswalk to better align with the South Main Market, and the proposed changes to the access and maintains the reduced 30km/h speed to south of the market. Along with the loading zone that's being proposed across from the market, 13 on-street parking spaces will be implemented. So here I brought up one of the floating bus stop details, as we get a lot of questions on what these are. So I'll walk you through the layout. On the far side of each street, you will have sidewalk followed by bike lane that's been raised up to sidewalk level. Then in between the bike lane and vehicle lane, we place the landing for the bus stop. So as a rider looking to board the bus, you would cross the zebra crossing and wait on the bus stop landing. A bus will pull up and stop within the vehicle lanes to allow for riders to enter and exit. So I'd like to point out in the design, we will be implementing tactile strips and tactile pads for the visually impaired, and you'll see those within the zebra marked areas. And what we really want to focus on was trying to get this area considered a pedestrian priority area. So in addition to raising up the sidewalk, raising up this the bike lane to sidewalk level, we'll have some additional signage and pavement markings indicating that cyclists must yield to pedestrians. Moving on to section 3, section 3 proposes to convert a large stretch of underutilized parking to create space for boulevard trees. Please note that the removal of street parking was based on observation and the availability of parking on private property. So if there's a specific need for parking in a certain area, this is a great opportunity to let city staff know via the feedback forms provided on the Shape Your City page. To finish off this section, you'll see a pair of floating bus stops and the installation of a new permanent crosswalk. Onto section 4. This includes preservation of most of the on-street parking, with parking pockets on both the east and west sides to better match the demands for parking. Relocation of the parking on the east side does reduce the amount available relative to today. However, a small number of boulevard trees are also proposed for this section, as well as a new crosswalk at Yorkton Avenue. Section 5 proposes adding trees in place of a large section of street parking that was not well used. A parking pocket at the south end of the section has also been included on the east side. Overflow boat parking and trailer parking is still available on the west side, south of the proposed crosswalk. A new crosswalk is also being proposed at Lee Avenue.
So that's the presentation, and now we'd like to hear from you. Just a note, if you have questions specifically related to active transportation design, all ages and ability standards, or other bike lane guidelines and requirements, we do have resources for you to check out at shapeyourcitypenticton.ca. We do have some questions in our Q&A, which is great. Just a reminder, you can drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A or raise your hand and we will get right to them. If you prefer to send your questions in an email, you can send them to engineering@penticton.ca and they'll be answered within about 2 business days. So with that, I think we'll open it up for discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Andrea. And I will ask if you can just go ahead and make it possible for people to speak, because I know that does take a little bit of time if anyone wants to address the group. So far, I don't see any hands raised, so we'll just jump into the questions. And thank you very much, everyone, for starting us off with some questions. And we can definitely go back and forth between the different slides just to help explain and respond to what you're asking. And so maybe with that, Jonathan, I think you have control. We'll go ahead with Shauna's first question. And so she's curious if vehicles from the north on South Main will not be able to turn into South Main Street now. Do you want to pull up that slide that shows that section?
Yeah, give me 1 sec. I'll just pull it back here.
And I have to be honest, I don't fully understand the question. So if you're not clear either, we can always ask Shauna to help us understand.
I think this probably pertains to the market and whether vehicles
South Main Market?
Yeah, vehicles going north or southbound can still enter the market. So that's true. Like regardless of whether you're traveling northbound or southbound on South Main, you'll still be able to access the South Main Market parking lot. It'll just be a single direction, a 1-lane flow through from the parking lot there. So South Main will have two accesses. One will be an entrance and one will be an exit.
Great.
And
so
perhaps I can just add to that just one other comment. It is one of the reasons we specifically worked with the market owners to try and create the parking pocket on the west side of the street as well, so that vehicles, when they are heading southbound, can quite easily pull into the parking pocket and then use the crosswalk to access the front of the market. If that is more comfortable than perhaps making the turning movement into the parking lot and using that one way. So we did want to accommodate vehicles visiting the market coming from either direction.
Great, thanks for that. So our next question comes from Carl Joyce. And so Carl would like to know, did we consider continuing the concrete sidewalk into where the pedestrians cross the bike lane at the bus stops? This method would reinforce the modal hierarchy by having bikes cross the sidewalk instead of pedestrians crossing the bike lane. These are very technical.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what we have proposed. So I'll actually go back to my little detail here. 1 second.
And I like that you have the large arrow there to help guide people's eyesight there, Jonathan.
Yeah. So yeah, what you'll see is we have ramps to go on and off of that conflict zone. But this zebra marked area is actually raised up to sidewalk level. So it's exactly what you said. This is trying to reinforce that this is a pedestrian priority area, and that actually the bikes are crossing the sidewalk rather than the pedestrians crossing a bike lane.
Okay, so hopefully that answers your question, Colin. If you would like to address the team directly, you can certainly do that if we didn't get it quite on the mark. Okay, our next question comes from Leslie, and Leslie wants to know, what are the accident statistics for South Main? And that's definitely a question we've received a few times, people thinking that the intent of this is to address safety concerns. So why don't I turn that over to you, Jonathan?
Do you want to take this one, Kristen, or do you want me to?
Sure. I guess what I would say is that the design that is being proposed is not being driven by any accident statistics. So while we do review them, and certainly speeding was something that we had reviewed and confirmed, the idea of the all ages and abilities infrastructure is to try and encourage those users who are not currently cycling to be more comfortable to cycle. So it's not necessarily that any of the design features we're proposing are specifically in response to any accident statistics. One of the elements that Jonathan didn't also highlight specifically was some of the curb extensions at the intersections where we are trying to shorten crossing distances. And we do know that there have been, some incidences, particularly at Green Avenue, high volume of pedestrians, high volume of vehicles. And so some of the measures that we've proposed along the route, similar to other locations along the route where we're reducing those crossing distance, are pedestrian safety measures that, again, aren't necessarily directly correlated to a specific accident statistic, but we do know that they do decrease the vulnerability and risk of an accident. And then I would just finally add that there is lots of literature out there as well around protected bike lanes, improving the safety for all road users, just given the reduced speeds that we often see in the corridors as well as that protection. So again, not responding to specific concerns related to safety on South Main, but just intending to improve it for all users.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, that brings us to our next question from George. George would like to know, what is the width of the bike lanes, given that a wide range of users ranging from e-bikes to wheelchairs with widely varying speeds will be using the lane. Is this width sufficient for a faster user to safely pass a slower user? And we have heard, and we do know that there are some fast riders that head out on South Main to get onto East Side Road.
Yeah, so definitely we've taken a look at that. I think the minimum widths that we've proposed on the bike lanes are 1.5 meters, but they do expand or they do get larger from there where we had the space. We've really tried to put in as many areas as we could with the larger width, and we kind of considered those. We've kind of coined it like conversational bike lanes where you can ride side by side. So during those in those areas where we had the available width, they are wider and they do allow for passing of slower users.
I would just add to that too, Jonathan, that one of the constraints, and I've used this in a response to a number of emails we've received, we're trying to work within the existing curb lines, primarily from a cost perspective, to try and keep the cost of the project as low as possible. And so when we were working within those existing curb lines, the measure we kept consistent was the vehicle lane widths essentially. And then we tried to, as Jonathan said, expand the bike lane width where we could without having to move that curb line, because of course that introduces a much more expensive cost to the project.
Great, thanks for that, Kristen. Okay, our next question comes from Dexter. Dexter would like to explain pocket parking. I think that's a question that I had when I first saw the proposed design.
Yeah, so I'll just move to one of these slides here. And as you can see, this is an area, please ignore, this is an aerial view of the existing configuration. So these cars aren't actually part of the proposed layout. But what you'll see here is we've left this little parking pocket here, which will be adjacent to the vehicle travel lane. And then beneath that, you'll see the bike lane, and then finally the sidewalk. So that's why we've kind of coined these as floating parking spaces, because they float in between the vehicle travel lane and the bike lane.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I did put a question out there to the group. There are some different ideas that are included in this that are intended to help slow the street down. I've worked here for 7 years now, and I tell you, right from the beginning, I've been hearing people say that South Main is too fast. And so some of these ideas are like, we're reducing the speed limit and narrowing the road width will slow people down. Additionally, adding the trees is going to help cool the road, cool the area, and make it more beautiful, I would expect. So I did want people to share if there's some features of the design that you do like, that you're looking forward to. And I see, so Shauna did give us a comment, And she felt that it is a great idea for more trees and boulevards, as long as we have options for more parking if and when houses are demolished and made into multi-residence on the same property. And I think there's a fairly small stretch where that would really apply, because the majority of properties along this route are like contained within like stratas or condo developments. But point made, Shauna. And I should mention to the group, I am taking notes, and we will take notes from this session, and that will be considered by staff as they're finalizing the design and included in a report that will be shared with council. So thank you very much for that feedback, Shauna. And so now Elaine, it's a long paragraph. Would you like to address the group and share your thoughts as opposed to me reading them?
Sure, I'm here.
Perfect, thank you.
I'm part of the group Citizens Against Barriers. I appreciate the project, and it's meant to improve traffic, slow the speed, beautify, all the rest of it. We're not objecting to that. The objection is to the cement curbs, because vehicles hit them. There are hazard signs now, and the ones I'm not considered for that reason. And in speaking to a fellow at a mechanic shop, he said they get 1 to 3 a week, blown tires and rims. I've traveled down it myself. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm truly not. We heard of an example on Martin Street where one young child hit the concrete curb and fell into oncoming traffic. They're not that safe. I used to work for a municipality, Transport Canada. We were never allowed to put that kind of thing on highways. This is not a highway. So I cited the response that I got from Kristen Dixon, because after numerous requests, we hadn't had that answered. So she said, the type of separation is usually driven by the speed and volume of traffic on the road. More substantial separation is needed for roads that are busy and fast, such as those selected for the Lake to Lake route. So in response, I'm saying, but you are lowering the speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour, per hour. That isn't all that fast. And there is a large community group. We have 2,500 signatures right now asking that the curbs not be installed. And the reason for that is the discomfort with Martin and Atkinson streets now, as they are. It's narrow. I put my foot on when I'm passing a big truck on there. I've witnessed arguments between delivery vehicles and cyclists. It just doesn't make sense to me. I view it entirely as a safety hazard. Other places don't require concrete barriers. There are other means of putting separation. And the research that I did in Europe, they do the vibration, like the zebra stripes that you're suggesting for the visually impaired on the bus stop platforms. That makes sense. Concrete curbs that you could trip over, hit, damage vehicles on, don't make sense. In my opinion, they're a safety hazard. So I'm asking, is the plea going to be heard or considered, or is it just going to be ignored?
Well, and thank you very much for that, Elaine. And yes, Kristen has shared your email with me, so it is part of our record, and I appreciate you sharing it with the group so they can hear a different perspective. And you may not agree. I know that Kristen has responded to you, but we'll let Kristen address the group too so they can hear her thoughts on the concerns you've raised, but just know that your concerns have been noted.
But will anything be done?
Well, let's let Kristen share with you her thoughts.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. And I would first offer a couple of comments. So the 30 kilometers an hour that we are proposing is not for the entire stretch of South Main. It is just for a section primarily to kind of identify that the area between the schools, the pickleball courts, the senior center, and the South Main Market is a bit different than the rest of the stretch. So the remainder of South Main will continue to be 50 kilometers an hour. And we've just slowed down the area in and around kind of those more active uses where we see lots of people crossing and whatnot. So I would just offer that comment as well. The second piece of that is that the traffic volumes, despite the speeds, are still also very high to have cycling infrastructure on. And again, when we're trying to create a corridor that people who may not be comfortable cycling next to vehicles can be comfortable using, providing something more secure than paint markings or even slightly vibration is something that we are trying to achieve. I shared in my email response to you as well. Certainly, if I had my you know, a blank slate and I could start from scratch with this road, I would design it very differently. I would use more of the landscaping treatments that you're seeing in some areas along South Main, where we would be using a more traditional curb that you might be expecting to see to border the landscaping treatments, and use that to buffer the bike lane rather than a standalone curb. As I shared in my email, the main advantage of that curb is that it is very narrow. It does create protection, and it does allow for drainage to still permeate through the road into the catch basin. So we're not having to modify the road design to accommodate this new infrastructure, again, in the most cost-effective way to keep the overall budget down. So those are some of the reasons why we are proposing the curb. I understand it can make people uncomfortable. The other thing I would add on this particular section is because we have the floating parking, so we'll have the 2 travel lanes and then parking on one side, motorists won't see that curb or feel that curb on one side while they're driving, because the curb will be adjacent to the parking vehicles, not necessarily the driving vehicles. So I do think that South Main will feel different than, for example, Atkinson. I appreciate that Atkinson feels quite tight because there is just the 2 travel lanes with the curbs on either side. But again, with South Main having that additional floating parking lane, I think it will feel a little bit more comfortable. But on the flip side, what I would also say is, for some of the reasons you listed around delivery vehicles, we see delivery vehicles blocking the bike lane all the time on South Main right now. We certainly see it as well on Government Street and whatnot. So some of those reasons why we are proposing barrier curbs is exactly the reasons you noted, because people are actually using the bike lane inappropriately, and we so it's not providing that protection, and then it forces the cyclist to merge into the vehicle lane. And we know that that can be a barrier to why some people won't try biking as a form of transportation, because they just don't feel comfortable making that movement. So for all of those reasons is why we're proposing the barrier curbs. Having said all of that, the purpose of this engagement is to hear from everyone. We're certainly going to gather that feedback and take that into consideration as we finalize the design.
Well, I'm hopeful you will hear from more on your in-person meeting on the 25th. I think a lot of the people don't have computer access or whatever, that's the issue.
That's great. Thanks, Elaine. Yeah.
I disagree quite completely. I appreciate the explanation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so that takes us to our next comment question coming from Call again. Thank you for the response and for this important project. Did you consider putting a landscaped median where the diagonal crosshatched area prior to the southbound left turn onto Green Ave is? And I'll just let Jonathan find where Carl's referring to. And Jonathan, you're on mute if you're ready to answer the question.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the best slide to show it in. But I believe you're referring to these yellow hatched areas here. So we did look at potentially landscaping them. There's a kind of a point where landscaping certain medians just doesn't become worth it for some of our parks departments to maintain. So we did take a look at this, and unfortunately some of the areas that are kind of within the hatch areas are just a little bit too small. Usually with landscape boulevards like that, we do have to bring irrigation to them, and it is also, like I said, a maintenance item for the parks group. So we're not able to do it in all instances, but we did try to do it kind of within some of these other floating areas as you see on this side here.
Great, thanks for that explanation, Jonathan. Okay, so George has our next question, and George wants to know, how does one make a left turn out of the bike lane onto one of the cross streets? Great question.
Yep, so there'll be openings within the bike lane to facilitate that movement.
So we have bike boxes downtown now, right, that people pull into in order to turn left. Is that the same kind of thing we'll see over here, or?
You'll see something similar to what we did on Atkinson. So for all of those cross streets there, you'll see an opening within the barricade, particularly in the T intersection ones, where there isn't a natural break in the barricade for the actual intersection. We'll purposely put a small break in the bike barrier so that bikes can make those movements.
Great, thanks for that, Jonathan. And so the next one is Leslie. Leslie is not a fan of what it looks like on Atkinson. And yes, we've heard that from a few folks as well. And, I think I can turn that over to Jonathan if you want to just explain what the difference is between the design on Atkinson versus what we'll see on South Main.
Yeah, so we did make the vehicle travel lanes slightly larger on South Main than what's on Atkinson, and kind of in addition to kind of what Kristen mentioned, driving through that corridor will seem a lot wider as well, just based on the treatment and having the landscape boulevards be adjacent to you on the vehicle lane as well as the floating parking. So it just won't feel as constrained.
And I know for me, I think one of the differences, and maybe you two can just confirm that, is that like, coming down Martin or even down Atkinson, there are more driveways, and that's created more openings, which requires more signage and more opportunity for some of those kind of tricky areas that were referenced by some of our participants. Is it fair to say that South Main, short of like one or two sections, is largely long stretches without driveways?
That's correct. Yeah, you'll definitely see a lot less signage on this portion of South Main for those exact reasons.
Yeah, and we really didn't have the opportunity to do things like add trees and such on the other section. So that's, to me, that's pretty exciting. I think it looks pretty great. Okay, that brings us to Dexter. Dexter says he likes the trees and boulevards as well. He also echoes that we needed to slow and encourage better driving behavior on South Main. As someone who uses the bike lane 6 times a week, the concrete barriers are needed. Car drivers are traveling way too fast down Atkinson. They do not look for bikes or walkers. Thank goodness for the concrete barriers. So there's another perspective heard from. Okay, and that brings us to George. George has a question about section 4. He says there seems to be 2 bike lanes in the middle of the picture and a disconnect between the bike lanes at the 7 vehicle spot. Right. So I think what he's not seeing is that the bike lane actually runs against the curb in between the houses and the cars. Would you agree with that assessment, Jonathan?
Yeah, that is correct. Just looking at the frame here to see if I can know exactly what George is referring to.
And George, if I didn't get that right either, you can we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and just give us a little more detail. But yeah, why don't you just show where the bike lane is on that west side?
Yeah, so as you can see, the bike lane will come through here with the area with the green marked paint. Oh, I think I see where the confusion is here. This is an error in our plans. We have some bike lane marking here, which is not supposed to be there.
Well done,
right
George.
Here, right here will be the vehicle travel lane.
Right. So that whole little green section and white section would shift over one, or shift down a bit. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is really the vehicle travel lane, not a bike lane as indicated in error here.
Okay. And what about further along? Is that
yeah, further along, there's a little shift in the center line of the road, so the lane will shift a little bit further to the east, but still continue on. Still a single lane of vehicle traffic. As we head into this area, you'll see the floating parking, and then the bike lane adjacent to that.
Great, thank you. And hopefully that does answer your question, and good eyes. Thank you for that. I know that it's hard to really see some of these drawings. It's a big long stretch that are included. So well done. Okay, so now Dexter has a comment. He'd like to offer that, to be clear, whether walking or biking, drivers have for too long treated Atkinson and South Main as highways to get through the city. This is simply not an appropriate driving approach. Good heavens, the school area on South Main at 30 is not at all observed by drivers. Well, I don't think anyone can dispute that's kind of been an ongoing challenge in that area. So hopefully this will help address that. Okay, and so Elaine is just sharing with us, adding this for documentation. Thank you very much, Elaine. Duly noted. Attendees at Citizens Against Barriers, including cyclists who do not use Atkinson because they are of the opinion the curbs are dangerous, and that she spoke to a gentleman elsewhere who had a scooter with 12-inch wheels, and he was concerned about the curbs and what would happen to him on a scooter with smaller wheels. Concerns for danger created by cement curbs is valid. Yeah, we've definitely heard that concern. One thing that I want to make sure that people do understand as well is, and it's kind of been a bit of something we've had to talk about throughout this project, is that these are not designs that the city has created. Like these are standards that are included in the British Columbia Active Transportation Design Guide and other transportation engineering design documents. So this is not something that we've engineered. This is something that is standard practice, at least in North America. But I don't know if you have anything else you want to add there, Jonathan.
No, I think you covered it off pretty good.
Okay. Okay, and so now Dexter says regarding the narrow boulevards, perhaps structural art may be considered that does not require as much city maintenance. So Dexter, you're suggesting that on the narrow boulevard, as opposed, as an alternative to trees, or are there some there that don't have any features on them?
I think his comment is probably referring to, yeah, in place of the landscaping, putting in.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we can look at.
Or the center boulevards.
A little
Yeah.
bit trickier in the center. Oh, sorry.
That's-
Go ahead,
No,
Kristen.
that's okay. I was just going to add in the while they look narrow on this picture, one of the reasons we were excited about the way that the parking and landscaping would be traded off, and again back to the concept of a pocket where it starts and ends, we are actually getting fairly significant widths for those boulevards. They are in the order of around 2 to 2.5 meters wide, and so that is kind of the width that we need to create enough width to have a really good tree soil volume to support a healthy tree. And we like the trees because, of course, as Joanne said, that creates that cooling and breaks up that asphalt heat island effect. So that's what we were going for there. But I certainly agree with you, perhaps in some of the center areas, example, the Hatching One area earlier that Jonathan pointed out, that's certainly something we could explore.
Yeah, I think it's important if I can just add this now, as far as the trees are concerned, we want to make sure that the growth, that the growth is considered so that it's not blocking the view for folks who are driving or on bikes and wanting to make turns and so on either side of the street. But I love having the extra trees, that's for sure.
Thanks for that, Dexter. Just to put my team on the spot, do we have a sense of how many trees we're looking at adding along this stretch?
I don't have that number.
Sorry, Jonathan.
When I last did the count, I think we were around 35 to 40 was what we were trying to squeeze in. We won't know the final number, Joanne, until we get through the full detailed design. And once we get all those, the breaks and the barriers, the driveways, all those kind of nuanced details, but we're really aiming to try and get a solid kind of 35 to 40 trees in here.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thank you. Dexter, did you have something to add?
Nope, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so George, do you live in section 4? So back in section 4, at 7 vehicles, the bike lane is to the right of the parked vehicles.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. The aerial photo is a little misleading because the aerial photo is of the existing conditions right now. So the bike lane is where you actually see these vehicles. The proposed bike lane is where you see these vehicles parked.
Okay, perfect. Elaine's asking if the new crosswalks will have flashing lights, and she says she's grateful for that development on Atkinson.
So several of them will have flashing lights installed for them, but not all of them.
And there are, so as you mentioned, there are a few new pedestrian crossings coming on the street with these changes, and they're better designed to support South Main Market as well as the schools, from what I understand.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would just add one comment on that, Joanne, as well, that we've been trying to reserve our use of the flashing light ped crossings for the higher speed areas. So for example, if we have any crossings along Government Street, particularly at an uncontrolled intersection, so that is generally where we're deploying kind of the higher level crossing control. In some of the lower speed areas, for example, through the 30-kilometer-an-hour zone, we would be looking to try and not use the more expensive flashing controlled ones, just because it's a lower speed, and we've got the reduced road width and other measures. So it's just one tool in our toolkit, but we usually try to reserve that for the higher speed locations, just because of the cost associated with them.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, and so we have one last question so far. So I'll just kind of give everyone a bit of maybe a 5-10 minute warning, and we do have more time, but if things are slowing, I want to give people their evenings back. And so I'll just say, hey, if you've been sitting on that question, please put it in the queue now, and we'll make sure we get to it, and then we'll let people return to their evening. So Elaine has a great question. How will debris be removed from inside the bike lanes, and how frequently will that happen?
Do you want to take that one, Kristen, based on ops and
Sure.
maintenance?
So we do have a specialized piece of equipment that is able to navigate the widths of the bike lanes. They're currently using it on Atkinson Street already, and they've been using it on Martin Street. And so it has a variety of attachments. One of those is a street sweeper attachment for it. And so they will be sweeping those semi-regularly. We generally see a little bit less buildup in the bike lanes than a painted bike lane, because of course you've got that barrier, the concrete barrier, which catches some of the road debris. So we don't envision needing to sweep them as frequently, but we do have that equipment and functionality already in our fleet.
Great, thanks for that. And definitely, like, we've had a few years of seeing when and where the debris builds up. You know, the spring was a little messier, and we had our crews out there taking care of it. So it's definitely something that we can adjust to over time. And so George has one more question. He thinks it's off topic. It's not. It's a great question. So, and I know it's one that Kristen likes to talk about too. So it's the white barrier that some people may have noticed has been installed on the northbound lane of Government by the hospital. And I think there's another one. Is it on Duncan?
Dawson.
Dawson. Perfect. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, so we've been exploring a variety of different treatments that we can add incremental protection. It's not as good in terms of, relative to a concrete barrier or a bollard, because of course vehicles can still semi-mount it. It is a mountable curb. It's not designed to entirely prevent it. We tried it in that location because our observations were that many vehicles, because of the curved nature of that intersection, as well at Carmi and Government, as well as at Dawson, vehicles were just shortcutting that curb. And so they were essentially driving right through the bike lane. And we know that those kind of movements are one of the lead contributors to cyclist vehicle conflicts, particularly in intersections. And so we wanted to try a product that was more narrow in its profile, doesn't need as much space, and doesn't take up as much of the bike lane as well as the vehicle lane. So we've been piloting that product at 2 locations to see how it's working. We're quite pleased with the feedback we've been getting in terms of how it is providing just a little bit more protection. And more than protection, it's mostly just guidance to the vehicles to stay in their lane, particularly again on those curves. So we're quite pleased with how it's working so far, and reviewing other opportunities and locations where it might be applicable to, again, just make sure vehicles and cyclists both stay in their lane.
Great, thanks for that explanation. And as Dexter offered that he has experienced the shortcutting on that curb as well. I think it's more a bit of a training curb too, because I think for drivers who drive over it, it's pretty alarming when they realize that they've kind of cut into that. So it has that benefit. Did you want to offer anything else, Dexter?
Nope. Just if anything, it is a deterrent, and just hopefully the drivers realize, and next time around slow down when they're taking the curve.
Perfect. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end of our list. So last chance, if anyone else wants to ask a question, and then I'll actually just hand it over to Andrea, who will remind us what's coming up for the rest of this process.
Yeah, so just like to thank everyone for coming and attending this presentation, and for participating in this important engagement process. We hope that you understand the project a little bit more in detail than you did before the meeting started. If you haven't done so already, please make sure to fill out your feedback form at shapeyourcitypenticton.ca before July 30th. And if you still have some more questions and you want to ask staff, we're going to be at the Farmers Market this Saturday. I believe our booth is up by, is it BMO? just at the corner by City Hall.
And also we have the in-person open house at the Senior Shopping Center on July 25th. And the time for that is 5 to 7 p.m. And we'll be inside in the Ken Weakness room.
Thank you
And
very
so-
much.
Yeah, thank you, Dexter, and thank you to our team here at the city who joined in tonight. And yeah, we'll let you return to your evening and enjoy this nice hot summer night. Take care. And staff, if you just want to wait online for just another minute or two, and we can just close things up.